Welcome back, or welcome for the first time to the channel. I want to talk to you directly for a moment. Did you know that 97% of the folks who watch these stories haven't actually subscribed to the channel? That's almost everyone. If you enjoy our content, hitting that subscribe button is the single biggest way you can support what we do here. It helps us continue to bring you these stories. Plus, you'll never miss a new video. So, if you've ever found yourself thinking, wow, these stories are something, please take a second and subscribe. It really makes a difference to us, and it keeps the stories coming for you. Now, to today's story, you know, they say life goes by in a blink, but sometimes a single day can feel like a whole lifetime, especially when that day is supposed to be special, your birthday even, and all you feel is invisible. That's how it started for me. That feeling of just fading away in my own house. It was my birthday, right? 53 years old. You'd think after all that time a person would feel seen. But with Jonathan, it was like I was just another piece of furniture. Useful, maybe, but not really noticed unless I was in the way or something was missing. I woke up early, like always. Figured, hey, it's my birthday. Maybe he'd even notice I made his coffee the way he likes it. The strong stuff that could wake up a dead man. I even put a little extra sugar in mine, a small treat for myself. He came into the kitchen, grunted a mornin', and went straight for the newspaper. Didn't even look at me, not really. No happy birthday, no nothing, just the rustle of the pages and the smell of his coffee. It wasn't a big deal, I told myself. Jonathan was never one for fuss. But still, 53 years is a lot of birthdays to go by with just a grunt. I tried to act normal, you know, like it didn't bother me. I asked him if he had any plans for the day. He just shrugged, still buried in the news, said he might go down to the hardware store later. Exciting stuff. I felt this little knot tightening in my chest. It wasn't just about the birthday, not really. It was about everything. The way we didn't talk anymore, the way he never asked about my day, the way it felt like we were living in the same house but a million miles apart. The silence at the breakfast table was thick enough to cut with a knife. I ate my toast slowly, trying to pretend I wasn't about to burst into tears. He finished his coffee, mumbled something about being late for work. Even though he's retired, old habits die hard, I guess. And that was it. Door slammed, and I was alone again with my lukewarm coffee and a whole day stretching out in front of me like an empty road. That's when I decided right then and there I couldn't take it anymore. I needed something. Anything. I grabbed my purse, told myself I was just going out for a walk, maybe get a little something for myself, but deep down I knew I wasn't just going for a walk. I was running away from the silence, from the feeling of being invisible. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere had to be better than staying in that house feeling like I didn't matter. I ended up at this little bar downtown. It was still early, but there were a few people scattered around, mostly older folks having a morning coffee or reading the paper. It wasn't my usual kind of place, but it felt alive. There was a low hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, the smell of coffee, and something frying in the kitchen. It was a world away from the quiet emptiness of my house. I sat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and just watched people for a while. It was strange, but even just being around other people made me feel a little less alone. I wasn't looking for anything. Not really. Just not to be invisible anymore. I was sitting there, the lukewarm coffee doing little to thaw the chill that had settled in me since Jonathan's usual non-acknowledgement of my birthday. The bar, though not fancy, had a certain warmth. The low hum of conversation, mostly from older men nursing their morning drinks and flipping through newspapers, was a comforting sound compared to the dead silence of my kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the dusty front window, illuminating swirling patterns in the air. I watched a waitress with tired eyes but a kind smile wipe down the counter, the scent of cleaning fluid mixing with the lingering smell of last night's beer. It was a mundane scene, yet it felt like a vibrant tapestry compared to the monochrome of my life lately. Then he walked in. Zach. He moved with a casual confidence, like he belonged here. I noticed the way the light caught the silver in his temples, framing a face that held both a hint of weariness and an underlying kindness. His eyes, when he glanced around the room, seemed to genuinely see things, unlike Jonathan's, which often seemed focused on some internal ledger of tasks and obligations. He sat down a couple of stools away, and I couldn't help but notice the worn leather of his jacket, the way his hands, calloused but gentle, rested on the counter. When he ordered a beer before noon, a little eyebrow of surprise went up in my mind, but there was something about his relaxed demeanor that made it seem okay. Like maybe he was just taking a break from a hard day's work. He turned to me, and his eyes held a warmth that surprised me. "Rough morning?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that was somehow soothing. I hadn't even realized my face was probably etched with the disappointment and loneliness that had been my constant companions lately. I just sort of shrugged, the gesture feeling heavier than it should have. "Something like that," I mumbled, avoiding his gaze for a moment. Suddenly self-conscious. He didn't pry, didn't offer some cliché about things getting better. He just nodded, a silent acknowledgement that sometimes mornings just were rough. He took a slow sip of his beer, and I appreciated the quiet understanding. After a few minutes of comfortable silence, where the only sounds were the clinking of glasses and the distant traffic, he turned to me again. His eyes held a genuine concern that made my chest ache. "You know," he said softly, "it looks like you could use a friend." The word hung in the air. A friend. It sounded foreign, almost like a forgotten language. Had I even had a real friend in years? Jonathan and our friendship had withered, choked by years of unspoken resentments and a lack of effort. The thought of confiding in a stranger was daunting, yet the loneliness inside me was a screaming void. Looking at Zach, at his open, honest face, I didn't feel the usual wall of suspicion rise up. He just seemed safe. "It's my birthday," I blurted out, the words tumbling out before I could analyze them. It felt foolish, seeking validation from a stranger, but there was a desperate part of me that just wanted someone to acknowledge this day, to recognize my existence. His reaction was immediate and genuine. "Well, happy birthday then," he exclaimed, a real smile spreading across his face, crinkling those kind eyes. It was such a small gesture, but it felt like a tiny spark in the darkness. "My name's Zach, by the way." I managed a small, hesitant smile in return. "Amber," I said. We shook hands across the counter, his grip firm but gentle. It felt natural. A simple human connection that had been missing from my life for so long. We started talking, the initial awkwardness melting away quickly. He asked about the weather, and I found myself actually having an opinion. We chuckled over a silly news story on the television above the bar. It was light, easy, but then, as the minutes ticked by, the conversation deepened. He asked me about my life, and the dam inside me finally broke. I found myself telling him about Jonathan's indifference, the suffocating loneliness of our marriage, the feeling of being utterly invisible in my own home. As the words poured out, I watched his face, and there was no judgment, only empathy. He nodded, his gaze steady, making little sounds of understanding that resonated deep within me. It felt like he was truly absorbing what I was saying, not just politely waiting for his turn to speak. He made me feel heard. He shared bits and pieces of his own life, too. The quiet pride in his voice when he talked about his carpentry, the subtle sadness when he mentioned his divorce. There was a vulnerability in his honesty that mirrored my own. He described the satisfaction of working with his hands, the tangible result of his efforts. It sounded so different from the intangible emptiness I felt most days. As we talked, the bar around us seemed to fade into a background hum. It was just us, two strangers finding a connection in the quiet corner of a weekday afternoon. And with every shared story, every understanding glance, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. He made me laugh, a genuine from-the-belly laugh that surprised even me. It felt good, really good. He made me feel seen, like the real Amber, the one buried under years of disappointment and neglect, was finally visible again. The afternoon, sun shifted, casting long shadows across the bar floor. The lunchtime crowd had thinned, replaced by a quieter, more relaxed atmosphere. But in our little corner, the energy between Zach and me remained vibrant. His compliments, though simple, landed with a weight I hadn't felt in years. When he said I had a beautiful smile, it wasn't just words. It felt like a genuine observation, a recognition of something I thought had faded long ago. A warmth spread through me, chasing away some of the persistent chill. When he remarked on my kind heart, based on the way I spoke about a stray cat I'd seen earlier, it felt like he was seeing past the surface, glimpsing something essential about who I was. He reached across the counter, his hand hovering for a moment before gently covering mine. His touch was warm, calloused from his work, but surprisingly soft. It wasn't a romantic gesture, not yet, but it was a tangible connection, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that was forming between us. A sense of comfort washed over me, a feeling of not being alone in this strange, unexpected moment. He looked me right in the eyes, his gaze steady and sincere. "You deserve to be happy, Amber," he said, the words resonating with a truth that startled me. It was like he'd voiced the secret yearning I'd buried deep inside. For so long I'd accepted a life of quiet unhappiness, convincing myself it was just the way things were. But hearing him say those words with such conviction planted a tiny seed of hope within me. Maybe, just maybe, he was right. We lingered at the bar, the conversation flowing effortlessly. He bought me another coffee, the bitterness a pleasant contrast to the sweetness of our connection. We shared more stories, more laughter. I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't with Jonathan in decades. It was like a dam had burst, and years of pent-up emotions were finally finding an outlet. With each shared glance, each understanding nod, the connection between us deepened. It felt like we were two halves of something that had been missing, for too long. As the afternoon drew to a close, a sense of melancholy washed over me. I didn't want this feeling to end, this sense of lightness and connection. The thought of returning to the silent, empty house filled me with dread. When it was finally time to leave, a genuine pang of sadness hit me. He walked me to my car, the setting sun casting long shadows. As I reached for the door handle, he stopped me, his hand gently touching my arm. "Can I see you again, Amber?" he asked, his voice a little hesitant, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that made my heart flutter, my breath caught in my throat. I knew, logically, that this was wrong. I was married. But the pull towards him, towards the possibility of something more, was overwhelming. The loneliness I'd carried for so long was finally being replaced by something else. Something warm and hopeful. "Yes," I whispered, the word barely audible. A wave of relief washed over his face, followed by that genuine, heart-melting smile. He leaned in, and his lips met mine in a soft, tender kiss. It wasn't just a physical act. It was a promise, a silent acknowledgement of the feelings that had blossomed between us in a single afternoon. A shiver ran down my spine, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. The drive home was a blur of emotions. My mind raced, replaying our conversations, the touch of his hand, the warmth of his kiss. Guilt warred with a burgeoning sense of excitement and hope. Stepping back into the quiet house felt surreal, like entering a different dimension. Jonathan was in his usual spot, the sign, glow of the television screen illuminating his impassive face. "You're late," he mumbled, his eyes never leaving the screen. The lack of concern, the utter indifference, felt like a punch to the gut. I simply nodded, unable to articulate the whirlwind of emotions inside me. What could I say? He wouldn't understand. He wouldn't even notice the subtle shift in me, the tiny spark of hope that had been ignited. That night, lying in bed beside Jonathan's silent form, I felt a profound sense of change. Confusion, guilt, and a thrilling sense of possibility swirled within me. But underneath it all, there was a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. I felt alive. And for the first time in a long time, I had something to look forward to, a secret, precious connection that offered a glimmer of happiness in the vast emptiness of my life. Our secret meetings became the highlights of my days. Each stolen moment with Zach felt like a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the stale atmosphere of my home. There was a thrill to the secrecy, a sense of adventure I hadn't felt since I was a teenager sneaking out to meet boys. But more than that, there was a genuine connection, a feeling of being truly seen and appreciated. Zach was so different from Jonathan. He noticed the small things, the way I did my hair, the color of my sweater. He'd ask about my day with genuine interest, his eyes focused on mine, absorbing every word. He remembered the little anecdotes I shared, the silly jokes I told. It was like he was building a mental scrapbook of our time together, each detail precious. He made me feel like I mattered, like my thoughts and feelings had value. One afternoon, we found ourselves at his small house. It was filled with the comforting scent of wood, sawdust, varnish, the earthy smell of different types of timber. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The quiet rhythm of his work, the gentle sanding of a piece of wood, was a soothing melody. I sat on his worn, comfortable couch, watching him, a sense of peace settling over me. There was a quiet intensity to his focus, a satisfaction in creating something tangible with his own hands that I found incredibly appealing. It was so different from the abstract, unfulfilling routine of my life. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and a warm smile spread across his face. He put down the sandpaper and the piece of wood, the silence in the room suddenly charged with unspoken feelings. He came over and sat beside me, the springs in the old couch groaning softly. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, our hands finding each other, his calloused fingers intertwining with mine. Then he turned to me, his gaze tender, and leaned in to kiss me. The kiss was soft at first, then deepened, a silent expression of the emotions that had been building between us. One kiss led to another, and soon we were lost in each other, the physical intimacy a culmination of the emotional connection we had forged. It was the first time in years I'd felt truly desired, truly connected to another person on such a deep level. It wasn't just about the physical act, it was about the vulnerability, the trust, the shared intimacy that had been absent from my marriage for so long. But the next morning, waking up in his bed, the sunlight harsh against my closed eyelids, a wave of guilt washed over me. The reality of my actions crashed down, heavy and suffocating. What was I doing? This wasn't me. I was a married woman. The familiar pang of guilt twisted in my stomach. But then my mind drifted back to the coldness of my bed at home, the silent breakfasts, the feeling of being utterly alone even when Jonathan was in the same room. A flicker of defiance sparked within me. Didn't I deserve to feel this way? To feel alive and desired? The guilt receded slightly, replaced by a stubborn sense of self-preservation. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of exhilaration and anxiety. The stolen moments with Zach were like a secret oasis, filled with laughter, affection, and genuine connection. But the constant pretense at home, the careful dance around Jonathan, was exhausting. I felt like I was living two separate lives, constantly on edge, afraid of being discovered. Then came that evening. I'd lingered a little longer at Zach's, reluctant to leave the warmth of his embrace. When I finally walked through the door, at home the silence felt heavier than usual. Jonathan was sitting at the kitchen table not watching TV, just waiting. His posture was slumped, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own internal exhaustion. But there was something else in his eyes, a quiet resignation that sent a shiver of unease down my spine. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. It wasn't an accusation, more of a statement. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The moment I'd both dreaded and, in a strange way, anticipated. The carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. I took a deep breath, the air feeling thin in my lungs. I looked at his tired face, the face I'd shared so many years with, and the words just tumbled out. I told him about Zach, about the connection we'd found, about the profound loneliness I'd felt for so long. I didn't try to sugarcoat it, didn't offer excuses. I just laid bare the truth of my unhappiness. He didn't explode, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at me, his eyes hollow and distant. "I knew something was going on," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just didn't want to know." His lack of anger, his quiet acceptance, was almost more painful than an outburst. It highlighted the vast chasm that had grown between us, the emotional disconnect that had become our reality. He didn't even care enough to fight for what we had, or what we used to have. The silence that followed my confession to Jonathan in the kitchen was thick, heavy with unspoken words and years of emotional neglect. The fluorescent light above the table hummed, casting a stark glow on his tired face, highlighting the lines of worry and resignation that had become permanent fixtures. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, a strange mix of fear and relief swirling within me. I watched him, every muscle in my body tense, waiting for the explosion, the accusations, the anger I knew I probably deserved. But it didn't come. He just sat there, his gaze fixed on some invisible point on the worn Formica tabletop, his stillness more unsettling than any outburst would have been. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, a grief for the relationship we had lost, for the life we had built that was now crumbling around us. Finally, he let out a long, weary sigh, the sound heavy with the weight of years. He looked up at me, his eyes devoid of any real emotion. "So what now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if even speaking was an effort. The question hung in the air, a stark acknowledgement of the precipice we had reached. I hadn't truly considered the now. My focus had been on escaping the unbearable present. The future felt like a distant, hazy landscape. I don't know, Jonathan," I admitted, the honesty raw and painful. He nodded slowly, his gaze drifting back to the tabletop. He pushed back his chair with a soft scrape against the linoleum and stood up, his movements stiff and tired. "Well," he said, his voice still low, "I'm going to bed." He walked out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the worn linoleum, leaving me sitting there in the stark silence, the weight of my confession and his quiet acceptance pressing down on me. The kitchen, once the heart of our home, now felt like a cold, empty space, filled only with the ghosts of shared meals and forgotten conversations. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. We moved around each other in the house like strangers, the air thick with unspoken words. The silence was deafening, broken only by the mundane sounds of daily life, the clinking of dishes, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, the distant drone of the television. I felt a profound sense of unease, a constant knot in my stomach. I knew things couldn't continue like this. The connection with Zach had awakened something in me, a sense of self-worth and a yearning for happiness that I could no longer ignore. The woman who had quietly accepted a life of invisibility was gone, replaced by someone who dared to hope for more. One afternoon, a tentative knock echoed through the quiet house. My heart leaped with a mixture of hope and trepidation. It was Zach. He stood on the porch, his face etched with concern. "I heard," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "Are you okay?" The simple question, filled with genuine care, almost brought me to tears. I nodded, though the truth was far more complicated. "It's complicated," I managed to say, my voice trembling slightly. He reached out and gently took my hand, his touch a familiar comfort in the midst of the turmoil. For a brief moment, standing there on the porch, everything felt a little less overwhelming. We talked for a long time that day, sitting in the quiet of my living room while Jonathan was out. We spoke in hushed tones, the weight of the situation hanging heavy in the air. We talked about us, about Jonathan, about the uncertain future that lay ahead. There were tears, moments of doubt and fear, but also a persistent undercurrent of hope, a fragile belief that maybe, just maybe, we could build something real and lasting. Eventually, I knew I had to face Jonathan. The quiet stalemate couldn't last forever. I sat him down one evening, the silence between us thick with anticipation. I told him, as gently as I could, that I wanted a divorce. His reaction was subdued, almost anticlimactic. He didn't argue, didn't try to change my mind. He simply looked tired, a deep weariness etched into his face, and said, "Okay." That single word, devoid of anger or emotion, felt like the final punctuation mark on the sentence of our marriage. It was sad, in a way, after all those years, that it ended with such quiet resignation. Looking back on it now, I know I made choices that hurt Jonathan, and for that, I will always carry a degree of regret. But I also know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that if I hadn't taken that leap, if I hadn't found that unexpected connection with Zach, I would have continued to fade away, a ghost in my own life. Zach wasn't just a fleeting affair. He was the catalyst that jolted me awake, that showed me I deserved more than just existing. He helped me rediscover a part of myself I thought was lost forever. It wasn't just about him, not really. It was about me finally choosing myself, finally realizing that I deserved to be seen, to be valued, to be truly happy. And sometimes, even when the path is messy and filled with uncertainty, finding yourself is the most important journey you can take.